Tanzania is a country often praised as one of Africa's most peaceful and politically stable nations. Well, it's now facing some of the most serious questions about its democratic future. The recent elections were followed by violent unrest, internet shutdowns, mass arrests, and reports of lethal force used against protesters, with rights groups warning of a growing climate of fear. Many opposition voices were prevented from campaigning or were detained, including CHADEMA's firebrand leader, Tundu Lissu, raising deep concerns about fairness, political freedom, as well as inclusion. At the same time, President Samia Suluhu Hassan is calling for dialogue and reconciliation, promising a national healing process. But critics say genuine engagement cannot happen whilst opposition leaders remain behind bars and young people feel increasingly marginalized. Well, to try and help us make sense of this and understand what is really happening inside Tanzania at this critical moment and how the world is viewing these developments, we're joined by Deogratias Munishi, who's the International Secretary for Tanzania's main opposition party, CHADEMA. He's a former youth leader in the party, and today he's a passionate voice highlighting the country's democratic struggle both at home and abroad. We're going to unpack quite a few things, but let's start with what is the atmosphere like in Tanzania right now?
Uh, the atmosphere in the country right now, I'll say, is a bit tense. Tense in the sense that people are still grappling with the aftermath of the October 29th of October. People are still looking for their loved ones, the bodies of their loved ones, whether they are if they are dead, or if they're alive, at least to have them back home. And that's the mood right now in the country. For those who have managed to get their loved ones who are killed by security forces between 29th and the 4th of November, 29th October and the 4th of November, are still having the burial ceremonies in the country. So if you're it is a burial ceremony after burial ceremony in each village after a village at least. And you can feel what kind of a mood is that.
Are people still being arrested, detained? The president has talked about forgive them for they know not what they do and calling for dialogue. In the middle of all of this, are people still being arrested?
I think I'm not able to address someone, a president, because we do not have a president. We do not recognize her as a president, simply because at least the facts are there. There was no election in Tanzania on 29th. People are protesting in the streets. The fraud stage elections, and therefore whoever who has been declared as a winner is illegitimate and therefore cannot be the leader of Tanzania right now. And much as she said, she called for dialogue, but we are asking, any sane person will be asking, dialogue with who? And on what? What is the problem? Okay. What is the source of this problem? So that hasn't been said. She hasn't even acknowledged what has happened in the country. And then somebody is preaching or dialogue. So the question is dialogue with who and on what specific issues? And number two, much as she has given that call for dialogue, which for us is not a real call, right now, arrests, arbitrary arrests and detentions are ongoing all over the country. And specifically members of my party, CHADEMA, are being arrested everywhere in the country, whether in the rural or in the urban. So if right now we are speaking here, a number of people have been arrested and they are in detention. So this is going on, and while someone is preaching for a fake dialogue, so you can see the contradiction there. There is nothing like dialogue because the actions that were being undertaken by the state in the build-up to the fake elections on 29th are still going on. Okay. And number two, if somebody is preaching of dialogue, there must be accountability. What do you want people to dialogue on? People are still burying their loved ones who are killed by the security forces, by the police in Tanzania, by who carried guns, bought by the Tanzanian taxes, and shoot to kill the Tanzanians. And then you're here calling for that dialogue with who?
There's a big question about numbers. It's being described as a massacre, and anywhere between hundreds and maybe even thousands. From what you've been able to gather, and I'm pretty sure it's difficult still to get the numbers because people are still unaccounted for. What's your best guess in terms of the number of people who've been killed or disappeared?
The rough figures that are on the public domain, at least from what you can see, it is over 2,000 people, at least on our side. We can confidently say that figure. But other groups have gone far to establish it is 3,000 based on how they have managed to collect the data. And others, so far, I know there are others who have gone, to estimate like 10,000 people, but that is based on what they have managed to collect and what systems they have had. But at least on our side, what you can see from the information we were receiving from 29th of October when all this saga started, at least the figures from our side has jumped even above 2,000. And therefore, if people are calling for a massacre, yes, it is really massacre.
As the international secretary, you are engaged with the international community, and it does seem that the international community have not recognized unilaterally or totally President Samia Suluhu Hassan, her presidency, or this election, and have condemned the killings. Do you think this is what's contributed to her trying to soften her language and maybe create a narrative that some kind of peace and unity is what she's working towards?
No, the reality is much as there is international pressure because we are not an island. We are living in a very well connected world. We are part of the global community, and therefore the international community on its own has a hand on this to say, okay, this is a proper mess. But the pressure, much pressure is from within the country, from within Tanzania, because to be honest, she underestimated what the public would do. She didn't believe if you observed it closely during campaign period, they were like, there is nothing like a demonstration, there is nothing like a protest. This is in Tanzania, and blah, 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 blah. Little did she know that, okay, everything was well taken care of by the public of Tanzania. So she didn't know that this is coming. She took the public of Tanzania for granted. Little did she know that the public of Tanzania, or Tanzanians in general, have refused to be taken for granted for far too long by the ruling party and her own government. So when that happened, and still people, especially the young people, are planning for December 9th demonstrations. So this pressure, you can see the immense pressure coming from the public who refused to be taken for granted by ourselves, and they have not bowed down simply because the security forces used unreasonable excessive forces to crack down the previous peaceful protests. People are still planning for December 9 protest, and this, I think, will be a nightmare for her and her government. So if she's calling for dialogue or reconciliation, two sources of pressure, the international side and the internal side. And she has failed even to understand both of them.
She says that she wants to talk to the opposition. And whilst she's saying this, your party leader, Tundu Lissu, is in jail, was barred from participating in the election. What kind of engagement has happened so far in terms of reaching out to your party and to your party president to even start setting up the idea of dialogue?
To be honest, Samia Suluhu Hassan sounds as a professional joker. Forgive me if I may use those ones, because she doesn't know even what she's speaking or talking in the public domain. She has set up a commission of inquiry on what she says to look into the breaches of peace during the election period and come up with recommendations. So we are like, okay, you have set up this commission of inquiry. And if you look even into the people into this commission, it tells you a lot how unserious she is. And maybe she doesn't know what she's doing at the moment, maybe because she's in a panic mood. About reaching our party leader or our party in general, the position is very clear. If you want to engage with CHADEMA, and as the party chairman has said, you cannot engage with a murderer. If you are a murderer, then you must confess your sins, so that people cannot truly, maybe you're serious. You have to confess your sins, and therefore you can talk with the people. She hasn't confessed her sins. She hasn't held or being held accountable, and here she is rushing for dialogue or reconciliation. We cannot talk with a murderer, a criminal in this sense. Somebody has to be held accountable, and accountability first before any sort of dialogue or reconciliation.
What do you as a party want to happen? What needs to happen uh, for a way forward in your country?
People have to acknowledge what happened in October. Tanzanians need to know who shot Tanzanians to death, who killed the Tanzanians. That person has to come and acknowledge. If it was accidental, then we have to say it by himself or herself. Without that, it's like somebody building up another time bomb, because people are still accumulating all this. As I said, people are still finding their loved ones. People are still looking for their people. They don't know whether they are dead, whether they are alive. If they are alive, they let them go home and meet their families. If they are dead, let their relatives, their family members get those bodies and pay them a dignified, last respect. This is not happening, and people are still putting that in their heart. So there is nothing that is going to cure this trauma if somebody doesn't come out clean and say sorry. And this person must be Samia Suluhu Hassan herself.
For many of us, and a lot of people, the focus on Tanzania seems recent. But if people read reports, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and just general news, the situation in Tanzania has been problematic in terms of democracy and freedoms for some time. Describe Tanzania leading up to this election, and for how long have you been living in a troubled country?
You're right. The problems of Tanzania did not start in the last of October pause. The problems of Tanzania have been there since, I would say, for a long time. And it is only that that feature of Tanzanians as humble, innocent people who love their peace, who like to settle their issues amicably, has been taken for granted, as I said. And the people thought, okay, peace should be the fundamental thing and should be safeguarded without knowing what is the foundation of peace. And in this, it is justice. So the government of Tanzania and the ruling party have ignored justice in the country. No wonder even the justice system is highly dysfunctional at the moment. Talk of the judiciary, it is highly instrumentalized, highly weaponized against the critics of the government and the opposition. And there is no deliverance of justice in Tanzania. This has been there for long, and people have been calling the government to clear out this mess without any response, any clear response. And that's why I said the government took Tanzanians for granted for far too long. And Tanzania said, no, not at this time. So we have problems in our constitution. We have been trying to address all these problems and even calling for constitutional reforms. At one time, if we are following close Tanzania, we had a process for rewriting the Tanzania constitution. Unfortunately, that process was killed by the ruling party and its government because what was being produced by them was very dangerous for their survival. And therefore, they decided to kill that process. But we have been again and again insisting, if we want a better Tanzania, a better future for all Tanzanians, we have to build our own institutions. To build our own institutions, let us write a new constitution in the country. Still, that has been going to deaf ears of the ruling party and its government. They have constantly ignored that call. And even in the lead up to the October elections, we as a party decided to stream down the demands and say, okay, let's forget at least the constitutional reforms. Now let's go for electoral reforms at least, so that Tanzanians can have a free, fair, transparent, and inclusive election. This still did not happen. And instead, the party leader was arrested, detained, and even given a fabricated treason charge that the state cannot even prove in the court of law as it is proceeding right now. The entire part was banned. Like, we cannot operate politically simply because we were pushing for those larger reforms. So the public said, okay, they will take the matter in their own hands, and they took it in their own hands. If we want to settle down Tanzania, we have to rejuvenate all these processes and give Tanzania a new constitution that will safeguard justice in the country.
And you talk about the public saying we need to take matters into our own hands. We're getting a sense that a lot of it is youth driven, that this Gen Z, Gen Z that we've seen in various parts of the world and even in neighboring Kenya, and we may probably see it, who knows, in countries like Uganda even. Um, have the youth found it difficult to be allowed to engage politically, and that they've found that this is the only way that they can force their message through?
Um, the problem that not only for Tanzania, for any country, whether in Africa or wherever in the world, that fails to understand that we are living in a new era with a new generation that does not take a no for an answer. And if you give a no as an answer, they might take it, but they will question why no. And if you cannot explain properly, then they will have their own answers and decisions. And at that time, then you will be seeing all these problems. So for Tanzania, for far too long, people have been ignored. Not only the youth, but I would say the entire population. It's only you're having a few minority who are the ruling class within even the ruling party and the government who think the whole country belongs to them. And they've forgotten that there is a larger public that needs to be served. There is a larger public that is thirsting for justice. Justice, if I go in the court, then justice should be served. If I need to access medical care, then I should be able. If I need to get access to good and quality education, then I should be able. While in Tanzania, that is not happening. And this is a generation that is asking themselves, why not? Why not? If you cannot provide, why not?
Could this be a turning point for Tanzania? Significant events have happened. Yes, there were problems before, but there's something quite significant about what we've seen October 29 and these planned demonstrations, protests for December 9. Could this be a turning point, do you think, for Tanzania in its journey, perhaps?
Definitely yes, because at least if there is anything that the current, I mean, the regime, those who have decided to cling on to powers without even the will of Tanzania, at least if they are able to learn, they should understand that Tanzanians of today are not the same as those of 1990s or 1970s. That people are quiet, people will just be told no and they will keep quiet. At least they should know today's Tanzanians can question and can question powers, the corridors of powers, and they cannot be silenced with anything, be it the guns as we saw, because people were there and people could see police coming with the bullets, carrying all sorts of ammunitions, but still people didn't bow down. So at least if they can grasp this and stop taking Tanzanians for granted and at least have that listening ear to their public, that should be the turning point. But I'm afraid they are not able to understand this properly. That's why we're still seeing the nonsense that is still going on in the country, how to deal with the public, especially from security forces. You cannot intimidate Tanzanians today, like don't demonstrate. The demonstrations will be crushed heavily. They cannot take that any longer. They used to hear those stories in 1990s, early 2000s, but not in this era.
Do you fear for your own personal safety? I mean, you are a senior figure in your party. Is this something that you have to be watching out for?
Oh, definitely. Any person in Tanzania, any person, especially in the opposition, But not only those in politics, opposition politics. Right now, it is any person, any civilian in Tanzania has to take their safety very seriously. So it is not only me or colleagues or party leaders or members. It is anybody in Tanzania right now has to take their safety very serious because of the incidents that we have seen in the past and also what we are seeing happening right now. That's why if you ask, it's not only me, it is for every Tanzanian.
And finally, what's your message to the international community, to regional bodies like the African Union? What do you want them to know, and what can they do for Tanzanians?
Uh, we have for the continental regional bodies, talk of the SADC, talk of the EAC, talk of the African Union. A clear message for them, as demonstrated by Tanzanians this time around, is they should stop servicing the top leaders of the club. These are not the clubs of leaders. These are bodies to serve Africans. If it is AU, AU should be for Africans. If it is EAC, EAC has to serve the East Africans. That's the purpose of the EAC, not to serve individual leaders like Museveni or Samia Suluhu or whoever. If it is SADC, then SADC has to serve the citizens of the Southern Africa. Then they should stop colluding amongst themselves. At least they are deceiving themselves that they will be in power forever. That is not what they should be doing. And if they want to learn a lesson, they should learn from Tanzania. And that's why we have nothing to demand from EAC, because for now it has proved to be a very useless body on the continent. And for the African Union, no wonder even the chairperson of the African Commission came ahead even of the AU observation mission in Tanzania to congratulate Samia, while the mission was saying, no, this was not something to be congratulated because it falls short of all democratic standards and even the AU Charter on Democracy. So it can tell you how these people are there not to serve Africans, but to serve a few ones who are in networking with. But for the rest of the international community, our message is very clear. In Tanzania, right now, there has been massacre. People have died. People have lost lives unreasonably, and therefore these have to be investigated immediately. For the rest of the democratic world, now they have to choose to continue working with a murderer, a person whose hands are blood-stained, or to join hands with the Tanzanians and to make reforms in the country. How is, number one, not to recognize any person claiming to be the president of Tanzania, because there is no anybody who has been elected to lead Tanzania as president. Tanzanians did not vote on 29th. Instead, they were in street protesting for the staged elections. Number two, if they cling onto power as they have done, they should not offer her any cooperation whatsoever. There are those who are supporting the government of Tanzania financially with the aid. Then they have to question themselves, do they have to give aid to a government that kills its own people? Is that a sane thing to do? Tanzanians at the moment need to reform their country, and any support that can be from outside, whether it is regional bodies, whether it is the international, to pressure the murderous government in Tanzania to make all these changes so that justice can be administered everywhere in the country. The judiciary can be independent and it can discharge its function properly, safeguarding justice in the country. The parliament of Tanzania, a very dysfunctional parliament, I think maybe in the whole of the world. I've never seen a very dysfunctional sort of parliament like Tanzanian parliament at the moment. And after the stolen election, it is only the ruling party that is currently in the parliament. You can imagine what sort of parliament is that. There is nothing that Tanzanians will benefit from this kind of parliament. It is because the elections were stolen and people have conducted a coup against their will. That's why they've imposed themselves, whether in parliament or whether in the state house. So we don't want this kind of nonsense to happen any longer. That's why Tanzanians need to reform or are looking forward to reform their country so that next time we won't be speaking of the negative things that are happening due to election, but we'll be speaking of the potential of Tanzania that is available for any person in the world to come and live in Tanzania.